Final Fantasy Legend is a turn-based RPG released for the Game Boy and a rebranding of the SaGa series for the North American audience. Despite being the first RPG for the system, the game really shook up turn-based RPG conventions in a number of ways, making it one of the more unique experiences I've had as of late. Once the game actually gets rolling, the story's interesting enough. Your party is tasked with ascending a tower on their way to paradise and need to fight 4 fiends plaguing the world along the way. I'm sure there were other important bits and pieces to the story as the game unfolded, but I wouldn't really be able to tell you what those are. For some reason, many conversations with non-playable characters, especially those advancing the plot, would automatically progress without me touching a single button, leaving me in the dark about how parts of the quest had wrapped up or where I needed to go next. It's not as if the translation of the game was particularly good, since it had many of the issues common to this era of gaming, but being able to read character exchanges would have helped a lot with world and character building. Like many RPGs of the time, Final Fantasy Legend requires a party to go adventuring with. There are 3 classes of characters to choose from, each with their own pros and cons, like whether or not they can be equipped with weapons and armor, how much inventory they can carry, or how they gain experience. Humans are supposed to be the more well-rounded of the 3 classes, with mutants and monsters following in that order. The manual recommends favorable combinations for a 4-member party and discourages others, so I took their advice. My party consisted of 2 humans, a mutant, and a monster so that I could get a feel for everything that the game had to offer, and it felt nice and balanced throughout my playthrough. In hindsight, I don't think I'd change anything, but playing with a different character combination will be a great reason to replay the game sometime. There are many challenges that can arise from not diversifying a party because each type of character behaves differently in battle. Mutants are the only class type that level up in the traditional sense of gaining experience from combat, while humans and monsters are different entirely. To increase any stats of human characters, upgrades to strength, agility, and hit points have to be purchased with money won in battle. Early in the game when money is scarce, it's really hard trying to balance paying to heal up at inns and upgrading the abilities of your human characters. Another strain on the wallet is that weapons and some types of armor equipable by humans and mutants degrade as they're used and cost a small fortune to replace. In the beginning of the game, there are way too many things to buy and not enough money to go around, making purchase prioritization tricky. I spent at least an hour or 2 killing enemies around Base Town to raise funds to purchase some backup weapons, some armor upgrades, and also dump some money into strength, agility, and HP so my human characters were more respectable. Although time-consuming, it was helpful being slightly ahead of the difficulty curve, at least for a little while. Monsters as party members are a completely different beast altogether since they can only level up by eating the meat of enemies killed in battle. Pretty much any enemy can drop meat, and eating the meat has no effect on humans or mutants. By consuming the meat of higher level enemies, the monster can become stronger and potentially gain new abilities, but this isn't always the case. Unfortunately, absolutely nowhere in the 79-page manual are there any instructions on which kinds of monsters are weaker or stronger, and because the eat stronger get stronger mantra doesn't always ring true, monster leveling can feel pretty obtuse at times. As a first-time player, you'll be firing away in the dark and crossing your fingers when you dine on your foes, and this may really lengthen your game's playing time depending on how many wrong steps you take trying to optimize your monster characters. Thankfully, there are many detailed guides online about monster transformations, so I'd recommend finding one that makes sense to you and use it to eliminate some of the guesswork. Monsters can become pretty powerful in battle with the right moves, so they're well worth taking along for the ride. If I'd had this game growing up, I probably would have loved trying out different combinations to see what happened, but as someone wanting to play the game a little more casually, I was really grateful that so many people had taken the time to do all that meat mapping for me. Now, although mutants seem like they would be the best to use overall, due to their natural progression by simply playing the game, they're much less predictable than other class types. This is because as they level up, their movesets change, but not always to your benefit. Sometimes great offensive attacks are randomly replaced with useless debuff attacks without any notice, and you'll find yourself in a sticky situation since the game doesn't make it obvious at all when characters level up. One moment you're winning the day gassing everyone, and the next moment you're stuck with something terrible like Stench that deals no damage. I really love the mutant class since many of their offensive attacks hit multiple targets, and they're quite powerful in times when their movesets are well balanced. I'd definitely play with a mutant again, since that character often saved the day when I didn't have enough power from my other characters to see me through tougher fights. I also loved that mutants could use magic, and that magic was a purchase item rather than having a level requirement for use. Although it was another money sink, it was nice to be able to load up on magic spells as much as the limited inventory would allow. That said though, I was not impressed that essential spells like Cure were only available to buy in certain towns, and not all of them. Although most towns had an inn, not knowing that Cure wasn't available everywhere really tried my patience in my blind playthrough of the game. By the time I realized I was running low on Cure spells, I would have had to backtrack a very long way through a treacherous stretch of the tower to get more of it, and that simply wasn't an option at that point. Potions are also available to buy, but they're much more cumbersome due to the limitations of inventory space. Dying in Final Fantasy Legend is a serious event too. Each time a character dies, they lose a heart, and after only a few deaths, your character stays dead forever. It's possible to buy more hearts, but it's ridiculously expensive to do so. You can also switch out dead party members for new ones at the guild at any time, but starting over from scratch to level up a brand new character in late game felt like a much worse option than hitting the reset button. The manual even encouraged resetting, so it's something I did often to save myself some trouble. It was easy to run into an enemy encounter and have the entire party wiped, especially while climbing the tower or exploring somewhere new. Though this didn't surprise me, I never seemed to be able to get ahead of the difficulty curve for very long unless I spent a lot of time grinding for experience and money to upgrade my characters constantly. The bosses were mostly manageable though, which was a nice surprise. I only had a hard time with one boss in particular, which I'll talk more about after. Something that I really enjoyed about Final Fantasy Legend was its puzzle solving. Moving forward in the game didn't only involve going to place A and speaking to person X to progress the story, but sometimes you had to find a hidden location on the overworld or solve a riddle in an interesting way. Somehow these puzzles were doable without too much head scratching over the translation, and I appreciated the variety they brought between the random encounters and tower climbing. I'm still really wondering where the girl they're talking about here is, though. I'm not sure if this clue was a mistranslated bit of text or if it was something more, but I definitely wasn't able to figure it out. One of the most frustrating things about this game is how very little you can carry around with you. I mentioned earlier that different party members can carry different numbers of items, right? Humans can carry up to 8, including their own weapons and equipment, while mutants can only carry 4, but monsters can't carry anything at all. Being able to have some party members carry multiple weapons was really handy to plan for them constantly breaking, because you could equip a backup on your party member and still be able to participate in battle when the inevitable happened. In addition to what's held by your characters, there's a small inventory bag to stuff some extra things into for your journey, but it really isn't much space at all. As you might expect, key items come up along the way, and unlike other games where they're sequestered to a separate area of your inventory, here they mix right in with other common items. I got to a part of the game where I was pretty desperate for space, and I made a few too many assumptions about being done with some of my key items and decided to drop them. And wouldn't you know it, I still needed them to progress. It was really bad luck because no matter what I tried, I couldn't get any of them back again and had essentially soft-locked the game for myself. Trying to go forward, I was met with an open door I wasn't allowed to walk through without the item on hand, and it was very, very disheartening. After all the hours I'd put into playing the game, my progress was gone with that snap decision to drop those items, and the game did absolutely nothing to stop me. I know the game didn't owe me anything, but when plot-related text boxes are flying by and you truly don't have a sense of what's happening in-game, a failsafe like having a second save slot or making key items undroppable would have been a tremendous help. Thankfully, lots of other RPGs don't let you drop key items to protect you from yourself, but I'm still really sad that I haven't been able to finish the game yet. On the topic of things that almost brought my game to a halt, the ability to save just about anywhere is another quirk about Final Fantasy Legend that put me between a rock and a hard place at one point during my playthrough. This should have been a really high point of the game, given that so many others force you to finish what you're doing or get to a new save point before you can save your progress, but leave it to me to use my newfound powers to my own detriment. Being able to save in literally any place in the game, I foolishly saved inside of a boss room, not realizing that a door had closed behind me. This was the fight against the machine, a boss fight that I've heard is a big game stopper for many players in their first time through, since they often wander in there unprepared, and I was certainly no exception. It took me over an hour of trying different character orders, different combinations of weapons and spells, etc., before I made it out of the battle with all 4 characters alive, and I was ready to give up a long time before that. There's nothing more deflating than seeing yourself painted into a corner, and this was something that could have been remedied very easily with a second save slot, or at least restricting where you could save the game. Not everyone's gonna save inside of a boss room, but I'm sure there were some broken-hearted kids that saved somewhere they shouldn't have and had to start the game over again. Or I very well might just be the only person in the entire history of time that's done this. It's very hard to say. Overall, if you play smart and avoid these problems, Final Fantasy Legend is a great game that I would recommend to anyone that appreciates a grind-heavy but rewarding turn-based RPG adventure. One of the really high points is the game's amazing soundtrack that made grinding and exploration a treat. A simple story that I'm sure would have been much better had I been able to read more of it. And a really unique character building system with interesting and diverse classes that lend it great replay value. This game was meant to be played in short stints on the go, and either as a casual or a serious RPG endeavor, it still stands tall today and is regarded by many as one of the greatest RPGs to hit the Game Boy. Although Final Fantasy Legend is just more of the same of what I love about old RPGs with some added flair, it was a groundbreaking beginning to a strong portable retro RPG library, and I'm glad to have finally gotten a taste of what's sure to be a great series of games on the Game Boy.